In the first generation of the church, a name change was an event. It suggested a person had lived in a way that forced the apostles to stop seeing them as who they were and start seeing them for the specific grace they brought to the community. This was the case for Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus. He entered a movement that was illegal, underground, and deeply suspicious of outsiders, a time when faith was often a death sentence. Joseph's first recorded act was one of total divestment. He sold a field he owned and surrendered the entire proceeds to the apostles to fund the needs of the poor. By placing his resources at their feet, he signaled that he no longer relied on personal security. He had traded his land for a stake in a community that owned everything in common. Recognizing this spirit, the apostles gave him a title that would stick for the rest of history: Barnabas. In their language, it meant son of encouragement. For Barnabas, encouraging others meant more than offering praise. It meant providing the material and spiritual stability others needed to grow. When Saul arrived in Jerusalem, the atmosphere was one of panic. To the early Christians, Saul wasn't just a stranger. He was the man who had overseen the execution of their friends. While the other disciples shrank back in fear, Barnabas stood as Saul's sponsor. He physically brought the former persecutor to the apostles and personally testified to the reality of Saul's conversion. This moment is a focal point in the teaching of Pope Benedict XVI. The Pope noted that by bridging this gap, Barnabas essentially restored Paul to the church, allowing the man who would evangelize the Roman world to finally begin his mission. Without this intervention, Saul might have remained an isolated convert, disconnected from the very apostles he needed to reach the wider world. Barnabas moved next to Antioch, where his work was so effective that the local community became the first in the world to be identified by the name Christians. He spent years traveling with Paul, often having to deflect the very success they achieved. In Lystra, when the locals mistook them for gods, they tore their garments to insist they were merely human beings sharing good news. However, a crisis eventually emerged involving John Mark, a young helper who had abandoned the team during a previous difficult mission. When it came time to set out again, Paul refused to work with Mark, viewing him as unreliable. Barnabas disagreed, seeing potential where Paul saw only a past mistake. Barnabas made the difficult choice to part ways with Paul, his closest partner, so he could take John Mark back to Cyprus and mentor him personally. This patient mentorship shaped the New Testament. Barnabas's support gave Paul the stability to produce his letters, and the young man he refused to abandon wrote the Gospel of Mark. Both were sustained by the same man. Much of our understanding of the life of Jesus and the theology of the church traces back to a man who refused to let a single failure define someone's life. Barnabas eventually returned to Cyprus, preaching until his martyrdom around the year 61. Today, the ruins of Salamis stand as a silent witness to the island where he began and ended his ministry. Centuries later, tradition records that Barnabas appeared in a dream to a local bishop to reveal the location of his forgotten tomb. When the tomb was opened, his remains were reportedly found holding a copy of the Gospel of Matthew, which he had carried throughout his life. This site, now home to the Saint Barnabas Monastery, became known as the Place of Health because of the many pilgrims who reported healings after visiting his resting place. These stories serve as a reminder that the influence of a saint doesn't end with their death. It continues through the communities they founded and the lives they touched. Barnabas looked at people who were broken, fearful, or rejected, and saw the potential that God saw. His life is a challenge for us to become people who look past the surface, to actively believe in those around us, and offer second chances when they are needed most. As we seek to build up our own communities, we can look to Barnabas as a model of how one person's belief in another can change the course of history.